Have you ever noticed something strange? The people who upset you the most usually aren't the strongest people in your life. They're often the loudest, the most disrespectful, the most childish, the most emotional. Yet somehow, a few careless words from them can ruin your entire day. One insult, one sarcastic smile, one disrespectful comment, and suddenly they're controlling your emotions without touching you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time someone can make you angry, they own a small piece of you, not because they're smarter, not because they're stronger, but because they know exactly where your strings are. Machiavelli understood something about power that most people never realize. The easiest person to control is not the weak man. It's the emotional man. Because emotions make your decisions before your mind has a chance to think. So here's the question. What if staying calm isn't about being patient? What if it's actually the highest form of dominance? By the end of this video, you'll understand why the most dangerous people almost never raise their voices, and how to become someone no insult, no manipulation, and no disrespect can shake. But first, I want you to write something in the comments. I control my emotions. My emotions do not control me. It's a simple sentence, but repeating it begins changing the way you see yourself. Now, let's begin. Most people think anger is strength. It feels powerful. Your heart races. Your voice gets louder. Your body fills with energy. It feels like you're taking control. But Machiavelli would say you're doing the exact opposite. The moment someone successfully angers you, they've already won the first battle. Because while you're reacting, they're observing. While you're defending yourself, they're studying you. Every expression on your face, every change in your voice, every impulsive word tells them exactly where your emotional weak points are. They don't need to defeat you physically if they can predict you mentally. Think about the people who always seem to know how to get under your skin. They repeat the same jokes, the same criticisms, the same disrespect. Why? Because your reaction taught them it works. Every outburst is feedback. Every emotional explosion is a lesson you accidentally give your opponent. You're showing them which buttons to press next time. That's why bullies rarely stop on their own. That's why manipulators become more confident over time. Not because they're becoming smarter, but because you're revealing the instruction manual to your emotions. Predictability is weakness. Power belongs to the person who cannot be easily read. That's why kings rarely argued in public. Great generals didn't scream across the battlefield. Experienced negotiators don't rush to defend themselves against every accusation. They understand something most people overlook. Emotion reveals information. Silence hides it. The calmer you remain, the less of yourself you expose. When people cannot predict your reactions, they lose confidence. And once they lose certainty, they lose much of their power over you. True strength isn't having the loudest response. It's having the discipline to choose whether a response is even necessary. When someone insults you, most people assume their goal is simply to hurt your feelings. But that's often only the surface. Many people aren't looking for your pain. They're looking for your attention. They're trying to pull you into their emotional world, where frustration, insecurity, and chaos become your problem too. Misery wants company. Insecurity wants an audience. Immaturity wants a reaction. Notice how some people seem almost disappointed when you stay calm. It's because they weren't looking for a conversation. They were looking for proof that they could still influence you. The moment you become angry, you've accepted their invitation. You're now playing by their rules instead of your own. Machiavelli understood that influence doesn't always come through force. Sometimes it comes through distraction. If someone can occupy your thoughts for hours after a brief encounter, they've stolen something more valuable than your time. They've stolen your focus, and focus is one of your greatest assets. Ask yourself this: how many people have lived rent-free in your mind because of one careless comment? Meanwhile, they may have forgotten the conversation minutes later. The greatest punishment you can give people who seek your reaction is emotional indifference. Not arrogance, not revenge. Simply refusing to become part of their drama. Stop feeling obligated to defend yourself against every accusation. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Attention is the currency people secretly crave. Spend it wisely, because every moment you give to needless conflict is a moment taken away from building the life that truly matters. Watch the people who naturally command respect the moment they enter a room. They rarely feel the need to prove themselves. They don't rush to dominate every conversation. They don't interrupt others just to be heard. And they certainly don't lose control over small provocations. Why? Because real confidence doesn't need constant validation. Only insecurity demands immediate recognition. Someone mocks them. They remain composed. Someone challenges their opinion. They listen before speaking. Someone tries to provoke them in public. They don't react on impulse. To the average person, this can look passive, but it's anything but weakness. It's discipline. Every unnecessary reaction costs energy. Every pointless argument steals your focus. Every emotional outburst chips away at the image people have of your self-control. Machiavelli understood that authority is built as much through restraint as through action. The person who reacts to everything appears controlled by everything. The person who chooses carefully when to speak appears impossible to manipulate. Silence has a strange effect on people. It creates uncertainty. When you don't immediately explain yourself or defend your position, others begin wondering what you're thinking. That mystery often commands more respect than 100 clever words. People naturally trust those who seem comfortable with silence. They assume that someone who isn't desperate to speak must have nothing to prove. Meanwhile, the loudest person in the room often reveals the most insecurity. They speak to convince others, and sometimes themselves. The quiet person speaks only when their words carry weight. In time, people stop remembering who argued the loudest. They remember the one who stayed calm while everyone else lost control. Because composure isn't just attractive. It's a silent display of power that no amount of shouting can ever replace. Imagine someone walks up to you and says you're the worst violin player they've ever seen. If you've never touched a violin in your life, would those words really bother you? Probably not. You might even laugh. Why? Because the insult has nothing to attach itself to. Now imagine someone criticizes the one thing you've built your identity around. Your career, your intelligence, your appearance, your success. Suddenly, the words feel heavier. Not because they're necessarily true, but because they touch something you've already decided defines your worth. Machiavelli understood that people instinctively attack what they believe you're protecting. If they notice you're desperate to appear intelligent, they'll question your judgment. If they sense you're obsessed with status, they'll disrespect your position. If they realize you crave approval, they'll threaten rejection. The attack isn't random. It's targeted. And often, you unknowingly reveal the target yourself. Every time you become overly defensive, every time you rush to explain yourself, every time you desperately try to correct someone's opinion, you're pointing directly at your emotional weak spot. You don't need to announce your insecurities. Your reactions announce them for you. The strongest people don't build their identity on things that strangers can easily attack. Their confidence comes from character rather than reputation, from discipline rather than praise, from self-respect rather than public approval. When your value comes from within, criticism becomes information instead of injury. Some comments may still sting, but they no longer control you. You begin asking, is there truth in this? Instead of, how do I make them regret saying it? That single shift changes everything. Because once your identity belongs to you instead of other people's opinions, insults lose their greatest weapon, the power to define who you are. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. The moment a conversation slows down, they feel an urge to fill the empty space with words. They explain too much. They defend themselves before anyone has accused them. They reveal thoughts that never needed to be spoken. Machiavelli understood that patience creates advantage. The person who speaks less often learns more. Imagine someone trying to provoke you. They expect an immediate reaction, an argument, an excuse, a burst of emotion. But instead, you simply pause. You look at them calmly. You let the silence settle. Something interesting begins to happen. The longer you refuse to react, the more pressure shifts onto them. Many people cannot tolerate that pressure. They keep talking. They repeat themselves. They become louder. Sometimes they even contradict their own words. In their attempt to regain control of the conversation, they unknowingly expose their real intentions. Silence has a way of making masks fall off. A liar often adds unnecessary details. An insecure person keeps seeking reassurance. Someone driven by ego continues talking until they receive the validation they're chasing. All you had to do was remain still. This is why experienced negotiators ask a question and then wait. They resist the temptation to rescue the silence. The other person usually reveals far more than they intended. Information is power. The more you collect, the better your decisions become. The more you reveal, the easier you become to predict. That doesn't mean you should never speak. It means your words should have purpose. When you speak after a thoughtful pause, people naturally pay closer attention. Your voice carries more weight because it isn't competing with endless noise. In a world where everyone rushes to be heard, the person who masters silence gains something far more valuable: clarity. And clarity is often the greatest advantage anyone can possess. Many people confuse emotional control with emotional suppression. They believe that staying calm means pretending nothing affects them. But that's not strength. That's denial. Ignoring your emotions doesn't make them disappear. It simply pushes them deeper, where they quietly influence your decisions without your awareness. Real detachment is different. It isn't about becoming cold. It isn't about refusing to care. It's about creating a small space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Machiavelli understood that power begins in that space. The moment you stop reacting automatically, you regain control over your own mind. Imagine someone insults you. Your heart beats faster. Anger begins to rise. Most people immediately become the emotion. They speak before thinking. They act before understanding. But a disciplined person notices the feeling without obeying it. Instead of saying, "I'm angry," they think, "I notice anger." That simple shift changes everything. The emotion is no longer your identity. It's simply an experience passing through you, like clouds moving across the sky. Emotions come and go. No storm lasts forever. So why make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings? The strongest people understand that every emotion carries information, but not every emotion deserves authority. Anger may tell you that a boundary has been crossed. Fear may warn you of danger. Disappointment may reveal what truly matters to you. Listen to those signals. But don't let them take the wheel. When your emotions become advisors instead of rulers, your judgment becomes sharper. People may still try to provoke you. Life will still test your patience. But you'll no longer be dragged in every direction by every opinion, insult, or inconvenience. You'll remain steady while others lose themselves. And that quiet steadiness is a form of strength that few people ever develop. Manipulators rarely rely on strength. They rely on momentum. They understand that if they can provoke an emotional reaction, the rest becomes surprisingly easy. First, they make a small remark. Then they watch. If you react, they know they've found an opening. From there, the game begins. They provoke. You defend yourself. They accuse. You explain. They twist your words. You try even harder to make them understand. Before long, you've spent an hour arguing while they remain perfectly satisfied that they've pulled you into their world. This is why Machiavelli believed that the person who controls the pace of an interaction often controls its outcome. The moment you stop reacting on command, the manipulator loses their greatest advantage. Imagine someone insulting you, expecting an immediate outburst. Instead, you pause. You look at them without anger. You answer slowly, or perhaps you don't answer at all. That brief silence changes the entire balance of power. Now they're the uncomfortable one. Now they're wondering whether their words had any effect. Now they're forced to question themselves instead of controlling you. People who depend on emotional manipulation hate uncertainty. They need predictable reactions. They need to know which buttons work. When those buttons suddenly stop working, they become confused. Some will try harder. They'll raise their voice. They'll become more insulting. They'll invent new accusations, not because you're losing, but because they're losing access to the one thing they counted on: your emotional obedience. This is where many people make a mistake. They mistake silence for surrender. But silence isn't surrender when it's chosen. It's strategy. There's an enormous difference between having nothing to say and deciding that someone hasn't earned your words. Not every battle deserves a soldier. Not every insult deserves your attention. Sometimes the strongest move is to leave the conversation entirely. Walking away isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's the clearest declaration that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. Machiavelli understood that preserving your position is often wiser than chasing victory in meaningless conflicts. Winning an argument with a manipulator is rarely a real victory. They aren't searching for truth. They're searching for control. And you cannot defeat someone at a game they invented by following their rules. You defeat them by refusing to play. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming intentional. Speak when your words can improve the situation. Remain silent when they only feed another person's ego. Respond when action is necessary. Withdraw when the only prize is more frustration. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The people who once enjoyed provoking you slowly lose interest. Without your anger, their performance has no audience. Without your frustration, their tactics have no reward. Without your emotional energy, they have nothing left to steal. Meanwhile, something changes inside you. Your confidence no longer depends on winning every disagreement. Your self-worth no longer rises and falls with other people's opinions. You stop carrying yesterday's insults into today's opportunities. You sleep better. You think more clearly. You make decisions based on reason instead of revenge. That is the hidden reward of emotional mastery. Your peace becomes untouchable, and nothing frustrates a manipulator more than meeting someone they cannot move. Because the greatest form of power isn't forcing others to respect you. It's reaching a point where your inner stability no longer depends on anyone else's behavior. When you become that person, insults lose their sting, Arguments lose their appeal, and manipulation loses its grip. You don't win because you said the perfect thing. You win because you remained the one person in the room who could not be controlled. Every time someone tries to pull you into conflict, ask yourself a simple question. Does this person deserve control over my emotional state? Most of the time, the answer is no. And once you truly understand that, something begins to change. You stop feeling the need to win every argument. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. You stop carrying insults long after the conversation has ended. Instead, your energy returns to where it belongs. Your goals, your family, your purpose, your peace. That is how real power quietly grows. Remember what we've learned today. Anger often gives your opponent exactly what they wanted. Attention is a resource that should be earned, not freely given. Silence reveals more than endless talking ever could. Your identity becomes stronger when it's built on character instead of other people's approval. Detachment isn't coldness. It's the ability to choose your response instead of surrendering it. And the calmer you become, the less control anyone else has over your life. Think about the people you admire most, the individuals whose presence naturally commands respect. They rarely chase validation. They don't argue over every opinion. They don't feel threatened by every disagreement. Their confidence comes from within. And because of that, the outside world has very little power over them. That kind of composure isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice. Every difficult conversation is an opportunity. Every insult is a test. Every frustrating encounter is another chance to strengthen the one muscle that matters most, your self-control. At first, you'll still feel the urge to react. That's normal. The difference is that you'll begin noticing the urge before acting on it. Then you'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll think. And little by little, what once controlled you will lose its grip. One day, someone will try to provoke you with the same words that once ruined your entire day. You'll hear them. You'll understand exactly what they're trying to do. And you'll simply smile. Not because you've become indifferent to life, but because you've become aware of the game. The greatest victory isn't humiliating the other person. It's refusing to let them steal your peace. Because peace is expensive. It takes years of discipline, experience, mistakes, and self-reflection to build. Don't trade it away for a few careless words spoken by someone who hasn't earned a place in your mind. Protect it.